Welcome to our webinar, Budgeting 101. I'm Kevin Reardon with Shakespeare Wealth Management. Budgeting, let's jump right in. First, some basics. When you're looking at your budget, we first need to identify what your income and inflows are. Obviously, wages would be one of the top inflows. Let's not forget interest income and dividend income that you might get from various investments. Capital gain income would be income when you sell an asset for a gain. For people who are divorced, maintenance and alimony, child support, those would be all forms of inflows. Of course, the tax return is a great place to find all of these income sources concisely on one page in one location. Although the tax return can be intimidating, if you pull out last year's return, you'll find all of this information on page 1 of the 1040. Now let's talk about outflows. Clearly the items listed here are some of the bigger outflows you'll face. Taxes, mortgage, utilities, insurance, childcare, things like that. The smaller items, gasoline, groceries, utilities, things like that, those will be monthly expenses you'll find typically on your credit card. And then the last one, savings. This is most frequently overlooked, but we need to include a monthly savings amount as part of our budget when we're considering our outflows. So let's quantify spending. And I have to tell you, historically, people bog down when we talk budgeting and spending and trying to quantify expenses. Let's first simplify that process. What I want you to do is grab 3 months worth of credit card statements and bank statements. We're not going to categorize expenses at this juncture. Just simply quantify how much you're spending each month. Add up those 3 months and divide by 3. That will tell us your monthly spending number. From there, we can multiply that by 12 and get a very strong approximation for what your annual spending is. So let's look at some budgeting realities after divorce. We've noted inflows rarely change after a divorce. If you're working, that number's not typically going to change. It's the expenses that change the most. And so when we have people who divorce, they're moving from one house in a way. There'll be 2 houses now. We found that you lose shared expenses when the household breaks apart. And so home furnishings, you now need to furnish 2 homes and not 1. Cell phones, you lose the economy of scale of a family plan, so now there's 2 plans instead of 1. Subscriptions to the internet, cable TV, satellite, Netflix, all of those subscriptions that both households are going to want, you'll typically now have 2 of them instead of 1. And so the takeaway is expenses for both households will increase after divorce. This next point I really want to talk about. Holding on to the family home after a divorce can really be catastrophic. Remember, expenses are going up and income is not. Typically, when we see one party hang on to the family home after divorce, it's at your own financial peril. And if not for your own, typically for the kids, where you may be maintaining that bigger, expensive house at the expense, if you will, of being able to afford college tuition for them at a later point in time. So we strongly recommend at divorce, if you can't afford that big house, to downsize. Let's look at some budget busters. First and foremost are taxes. Typically, people think of their gross income and they fail to back out taxes when they're planning their spending. We have to account for federal taxes, state income taxes, payroll taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, and so on, before you have any money remaining from which to spend. Then we're going to look at reoccurring expenses, and these are the expenses that creep up on people over the course of years. So if you've been married for 5, 10, 15 years, it's very likely these expenses have crept slowly into your monthly budget. the cell phone bill, the cable satellite, high-speed internet, the health club, Spotify, the Amazon spending that happens each and every month. Upon divorce, our recommendation is to cut as many of these expenses as possible. Even though you'll still maintain a cell phone and high-speed internet and so on, we recommend stopping the automatic component of that expense, forcing you to write a check each and every month to gauge how much and to what value each one brings to you, so you can better decide whether you'll keep it long term. Let's now look at some miscellaneous budget busters. Starbucks. How many of us make the daily runs to the coffee shop? You add up the $2 or $3 cup of coffee each and every day over the course of a year. It really adds up. Eating out. From stopping for a quick sandwich at breakfast to lunch to a dinner out. On a weekend, let's just go grab a bite to eat, much less when you're vacationing and eating out. That expense has grown dramatically over the last 2 decades for many of us and has consumed a bigger portion of our budgets. Car purchases. How often do we find ourselves spending $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 or more on a new car? It's important when you look at an asset that depreciates to truly minimize the amount of money spent in that area. Housing is another area over the last 2 decades where that expense has consumed a larger percentage of budgets relative to years past. And so you really want to focus on minimizing that. Vacations. Growing up as kids, what level of vacations did you take relative to what you're doing today? You know, the camping trip way back when might have cost us $500. Today we all feel compelled to get on an airplane and perhaps go to the Caribbean or some faraway place and spend a far greater chunk of money on vacations. If you have young kids, what amount of money are you spending on club sports like soccer, swimming, dance? Many of those activities are hugely expensive and eat into your financial viability. In general, we are a consumer society. At every turn, from billboards to the internet, magazines, TV ads, we're being encouraged to consume, consume, consume. It's really important to control that part of our life so we can achieve financial security. So the basics. Pay yourself first. The 401k is the most common form of an automatic savings plan. But even if you don't have a 401k, you can set up an automatic transfer each and every month from your checking or savings account to a brokerage or retirement account. Typically, we'd recommend a 15% savings rate or more, especially after divorce, but that will really be determined with a thorough financial plan. Quantify your spending. How much money do you need each and every month to pay your bills? An emergency fund, we want 3 to 6 months of living expenses sitting in the bank to anticipate unexpected expenses. In the event the furnace breaks, or one of the kids needs braces, or the car needs maintenance. All those things should be really prepaid and have money sitting in the bank. Don't forget about the larger expenses. Putting a new roof on the house, sending your kids to college, if one of your children gets married, obviously retirement. What about health insurance? Accounting for that. Deferred gratification, the whole concept of saving today so you'll have more tomorrow makes sense. Keep in mind that if you don't do that, you're running the risk of financial destitution in the future. Compound interest, really get your money working for you. Get it invested, earning money on your behalf. And focus on the big picture with all of this. What's truly the most important thing in your life, and focus on it. Typically, the new car is not nearly important as your family or financial security, things like that. We hope you've enjoyed this webinar. If you need additional assistance, feel free to reach out to us at any time. Thanks for listening.